To begin, before I get into what I'm going to say, I want to let you guys know that I remember when the New Dentist Committee was formed in 1987. And ever since then, I've always looked forward to attending your meetings because the new dentists have energy that you see nowhere else. And you also have a knowledge of the issues that really give me some hope for the future. I can promise you that when I was a young dentist, very few of my contemporaries understood the big picture like you guys do. As Sam said, what I've been asked to do today is discuss reflections of the role of the American College of Dentists in the American Dental Association. As you know, the road to become a dentist these days is very competitive. It requires considerable effort and a very high tolerance for delayed gratification. And so becoming a member of the profession today is truly a prestigious achievement. But dentistry hasn't always been perceived by the public to have the kind of credibility that it does today. In the past, dentists were perceived by many as basically being technicians who used very unpleasant procedures to treat toothaches. You could say that they were often seen by many as just an unnecessary evil. They were necessary, but no one really wanted to go to the dentist. This afternoon, what I'm going to do is review the ADA's long journey to attain credibility for the dental profession. And I'll include the role of the American College of Dentists in that journey, which will explain why the American College is considered the conscience of dentistry. I'm going to select very selected, I'm going to skip a lot of them, but I'm going to pick selected milestones in the history of the ADA to put that journey into historic perspective. Then I'll summarize the reality of dentistry's status today, and finally, I will suggest a possible way for us to confront our current challenges. I'm going to get started by asking a rhetorical question. Why did you register for this conference? And of course, I can think of quite a few potential answers. For example, it's possible that you got your information, sent in your money, canceled your patients for today, made hotel reservations, and drove to Williamsburg to hear me talk. That's possible. But I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. Because it's more likely that you came because there's really excellent CE at this conference. And there is indeed excellent CE at this conference. I know most of the speakers and they're excellent. But you know, there's a plethora of CE opportunities. So why this conference? It's probably because you enjoy getting together with others who share your perspectives, goals, and challenges. Now, if that's the case, you definitely have something in common with our founding fathers, because that brings us to our first milestone. The year is 1859. James Buchanan is the president. Oregon was admitted to the Union. That's the year that Charles Darwin published Origin of the Species. 26 dentists decided to get together for a meeting in Niagara Falls, New York. And they enjoyed the camaraderie of that meeting so much that they decided it would really be a great idea to get together on a regular basis. So they formed the American Dental Association. The next year, they kind of formulated the operating rules for the organization. Unfortunately, for their third annual get-together, they had to cancel it because the Civil War began. it's pretty obvious that fellowship was their first priority, because there was absolutely no work product out of this group until 7 years after the ADA was formed. The year was 1866. That was the year after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson was the president, and that's the year that the Ku Klux Klan was founded. The ADA drafted its first code of dental ethics. I think it's rather revealing that for our founding fathers, their primary concern, their first concern, was the behavior of their colleagues. And of course, that begs the question, maybe we should think about that being our primary concern. Now, this first code of ethics had very, very little resemblance to the ADA's current Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. It was actually just a simple sentence. The sentence was, quote, "The dentist should be ever ready to respond to the wants of his patients and should fully recognize the obligations involved in the discharge of his duties towards them." But even though that sentence was pretty simple, it was a very important milestone for the American Dental Association, because it was the ADA's first attempt at standards development. Standards development is the ADA's most important function. When the ADA does member surveys, every time our members tell us that they believe our most important function is advocacy. And of course, in this very politically charged world, advocacy is very important. But standards development is more important, because it's standards development that makes us a self-regulating profession. In countries where dentistry does not develop its own standards, it's a trade, not a profession. The ADA was 40 years old before it opened membership to other dentists. These 26 dentists, 40 years old before they opened membership. The year was 1899. William McKinley was president. It was the year after the Spanish-American War. It was the year that aspirin was patented. Obviously, by this time, those founding members were pretty much senior citizens like I am. They'd been around for a while. But they decided that it would be a good idea to recruit more dentists so that the ADA would better represent the profession as a whole. And so they began the ADA's first membership initiative. It was 49 years after that first meeting in Niagara Falls before they launched their first patient education initiative. I mean, in this day of prevention, that's hard for us to believe, but it's true. At the time, most patients only saw their dentist on a PRN basis. They consider the loss of teeth either hereditary or just the natural consequence of aging. The year was 1908. Teddy Roosevelt was president, and Oklahoma was admitted to the Union. That's the year that Einstein published his quantum theory. The ADA published its first patient education pamphlet. The message was pretty simple. Brush your teeth twice a day, floss on a regular basis, and see the dentist twice a year. But actually, it was the toothpaste companies, not the ADA, that first recommended that patients should see their dentist twice a year. Furthermore, toothpaste advertising had a much greater impact on oral health education than the ADA's little pamphlet. This was the beginning of a long, symbiotic relationship between dental industry and the dental profession. The next milestone was 1912. The ADA at this point is 53 years old. Howard Taft is president. Arizona, Alaska, and New Mexico are admitted to the Union. And that's the year that the Titanic sank. The ADA developed its first constitution and bylaws. This new constitution and bylaws included provisions for a board of trustees and a House of Delegates. It also established our tripartite membership structure that we currently have. The very next year, 1913, which happened to be the first year that the federal government was authorized to collect income taxes, the ADA convened its first board of trustees and seated its first House of Delegates. That's also the year that the first Journal of the American Dental Association was published. Now we're going to fast forward to 1920. Woodrow Wilson is president. That's the year of the first radio broadcast. The ADA is 61 years old, and these membership initiatives have worked. In 1920, half of the dentists in the United States belonged to the American Dental Association. So they had sort of reached critical mass. 1920 was also the first year of Prohibition, and it was the year that women were given the right to vote. Maybe these were times in our American culture where we were doing a little reassessment, because ADA leaders were becoming very concerned about dentistry's poor public image. They identified three significant problems that they thought might be responsible for this poor public image. First, some dentists were self-aggrandizing and claimed superiority over their colleagues. The second problem is that some dentists were actually recommending treatments that were not professionally acceptable, or in some cases, they weren't even necessary. Back then, they called them snake oil salesmen. Today, we would say they are dentists who are practicing outside the parameters of care. The third problem that these leaders found was that there was a rapid growth of proprietary dental schools. Now, the problem with proprietary dental schools is, of course, they're for-profit institutions, and they depended upon tuition for profit. So they were not particularly inclined to weed out students who were unethical or incompetent. This problem was compounded by the fact that there were absolutely no established standards for dental education. So these ADA leaders believed that these issues were so great that a new separate organization was needed to specifically address these issues. So they formed the American College of Dentists. The original charge to the American College in 1920 was to work with the ADA to, one, elevate the educational and ethical standards of dentistry, and two, to offer fellowship to those dentists who did meritorious work in those areas. A century later, we are the beneficiaries of their vision. The next milestone is 6 years later. The year is 1926. Calvin Coolidge is president. It's the year that the first SAT test was given. Al Capone is terrorizing Chicago. A fellow named William Guys, who was a biochemistry professor at Columbia University, completed a very comprehensive study on dental education. And the fact that Dr. Guys was a basic scientist, not a dentist, gave incredible credibility to the report. It took the ADA over a decade to implement the needed changes, but the Guys report is still considered the basis for modern dental education. It was 9 years after the American College was formed before there were any tangible results seen. I hope you all are getting the idea that things didn't move real fast back in these days. The year was 1928. Herbert Hoover was president. It's the year that Amelia Earhart flew over the Atlantic Ocean. It was the year before the Great Depression and the Valentine's Day Massacre. The ADA recognized that to be a credible science-based profession, that they needed to take the lead in dental science. So they established a cooperative research program with the National Board of Standards, and they dedicated 30% of all dues to dental research. As some of you probably know, some of the products of this research program have been composite restorations, the high-speed handpiece, and panoramic x-rays. And that's, believe me, if you went up there, you would be impressed with what they do. The next milestone was 16 years later. I'm sorry. The next milestone was 10 years after the Guy's report went out, the one on education. It was 1936. Franklin Roosevelt was the president, and it was 3 years before the start of World War II. It's the first year that radioisotopes were used in medicine. The ADA formed the Council on Dental Education. The charge to the council was, one, to establish uniform standards in dental education, and second was to establish a process to accredit dental schools. That was the ADA's third standards development initiative. Now let's fast forward 14 years. It's 1950, 30 years after the American College was formed. The ADA is now 89 years old. Harry Truman's president. It was the year that the Korean War began, and it was also the year that research for the hydrogen bomb began. This was probably the most meritorious of all of the ADA's milestones. The original intent for forming the American College of Dentists reached its full fruition. The ADA reached a level of professionalism that had never been seen before. To put things in perspective, let me give you a little background information. At that time, 85% of all dental revenues came from three sources. The first was amalgam restoration of carious teeth. The second was the removal of periodontally involved teeth. And the third was making dentures to replace those teeth they had removed. Now, in the face of that economic reality, the ADA House of Delegates approved to launch two remarkable initiatives. The first was a campaign to promote fluoridation of drinking water. And that was estimated to reduce dental caries by about 50%. The second was a campaign to prevent periodontal disease. And remember, periodontal disease was responsible for about 80% of all those extractions that they were doing. Now, as you think of this milestone, remember that these dentists didn't know that there were other sources of dental revenue on the horizon. Preventive services were not really an integral part of their business models. The high-speed handpiece didn't even exist. They didn't even know that someday they would have composite restorations, much less implants and metal and ceramic crown and bridge and Cerex crowns. I mean, they had no idea that this was on the horizon, and yet they made that decision. The truth is, as we sit here today, we stand on the shoulders of giants. These dentists took the high road for the benefit of the public, knowing that there was potential risk to their own livelihoods. Now, when you're considering the significance of this milestone, you also need to be mindful of the fact that professional status is a privilege, not a right. The privilege of being a self-regulating profession is conferred by society to trusted groups based on the behaviors of that group's members. And when that public trust is lost, the government takes over. And the government sets the standards like it does for electricians, plumbers, and other tradesmen. Those 1950 ADA initiatives elevated dentistry to the highest point of professional credibility. To try to put this in perspective today, just try to imagine the Accountants Association in this country starting an initiative to promote the flat tax. Or if you really want to stretch your imagination, imagine the Trial Lawyers Association launching an initiative to decrease litigation 50%. This was probably the high point in the public's recognition of the integrity of dentistry. And as many of you, I'm sure, know, the fluoridation of drinking water is still recognized as one of the top 10 public health initiatives ever. Now, this was an incredible way to start the decades of the 1950s and the 1960s. Retrospectively, those 20 years were probably the glory years for the profession's credibility. At that time, 90% of Americans' dentists were members of the American Dental Association. And they weren't members because they had to be. They were members because they wanted to be. They were proud to be part of such a respected profession. Keep in mind, this level of respect for dentistry was a new phenomenon. They did not take it for granted the way we do today. As a 1968 Medical College of Virginia / VCU graduate, my dean was Dr. Harry Lyons. Dr. Lyons was actually one of those leaders who was responsible for those two 1950 initiatives. And believe me, ethics and professionalism were vigorously stressed throughout my dental school tenure. In the early years of my career, when someone missed one of our component meetings, their friends called them to make sure they were okay, because they didn't miss local dental meetings unless they really had a good reason. At that time, there were about 90,000 dentists in America. And during those 20 years, our annual sessions sometimes exceeded 50,000 in attendance. Just for perspective, today we have about 200,000 dentists in the country, and we consider meeting with about 30,000 dentists to be 30,000 attendees to be a pretty good meeting. And it is a good meeting. It's better than other professional associations have, but yet the comparison is rather interesting. By 1950, the national standards for dental education were well established, and all of the American dental schools were accredited by the ADA's Commission on Dental Accreditation. Continuing education was not mandated in those days, but the number attending CE courses was mushrooming because the dentists were beginning to realize that practice was changing so fast that there was a real need for lifelong learning. During the 50s and 60s, there was a general consensus concerning what was professionally appropriate behaviors. And those exhibiting inappropriate behaviors were condemned by their peers. In those days, the gap between what was legal and what was ethical was huge. The ethical standards were way up here, much higher than they are now. Legal standards were way down here, much lower than they are now. The benchmark for acceptable behavior was the ADA's Code of Ethics, not the law. And state boards of dentistry across the country vociferously enforced our Code of Ethics. Okay, now to be fair, everything I've told you is true, but I don't want you to get the impression that it was the dental utopia during those 20 years. There were problems. For example, while it's true that most dentists for the first time started really stressing prevention in their practices, some of them just ignored pre-existing periodontal disease. And they were putting crowns and bridges on teeth that were just periodontally compromised. Plus, the public was much slower than the profession to accept the cost-benefit ratio of preventive dentistry. Many people thought if they went to the dentist and the dentist charged them and didn't even remove a tooth or fill a tooth, that was a ripoff. And so full mouth extractions and full dentures were still part of the dental destiny for lots of Americans. The air we breathed at dental meetings was so polluted with cigarette smoke that it's hard for you to imagine. You've never seen it like that in your generation, but you could literally cut it with a knife. And although ADA has never had discriminatory membership policy, the dental profession at that time was overwhelmingly white and male. Some of the ethical restrictions on advertising were so severe that it was a disservice to the dentist and the public. For example, when I was in residency at MCV, it was unethical for a board-certified specialist to put their specialty in the phone book. Now, unfortunately, those severe advertising restrictions led to the next milestone, which was 1977. Jimmy Carter was president, and it's the year that the first Apple computer was sold. The Federal Trade Commission legally challenged the ADA's advertising policies and won. And that's the origin of the ever-increasing reluctance of state boards of dentistry to enforce our ethical standards. Okay, let's fast forward now 42 years to today. I assume that everyone in here, or most people in here, would agree this is a great time to be a dentist. I mean, dentistry really is good. According to Forbes in 2018, dentistry was the second most desirable profession to enter. And according to Gallup in 2018, it was among the top 5 trusted professions. America's dental IQ is higher than ever. Most Americans today not only want to keep their teeth, they want their teeth to look great. And many good jobs today require a good smile. We have awesome technology, advanced pharmaceuticals, and lightning speed communications. The bottom line is we have the ability to provide oral health care today that would have been unimaginable just a couple of decades ago. Nonetheless, there are some really ominous realities that we should not ignore. Adherence to the ADA's ethical standards is steadily declining. The ADA's market share is steadily declining. Our American culture is permeated by moral relativism. For some dentists, instead of income being the byproduct of good patient care, it is the product for their practice. Some of the treatments are driven by the dentist's desire to use new technology, not the oral health needs of their patients. And those that are critical of ethical misconduct are often labeled as being intolerant. So even egregious ethical misconduct is often just ignored. Now, this is compounded by the fact that self-regulation by the profession has become increasingly difficult. Dental boards, dental associations, and some dental schools have become really pusillanimous about addressing ethical issues. And of course, the reason is because they fear litigation and they fear that dreaded Federal Trade Commission reprisal. Of course, today's dental profession is much more diverse than it was back in the 1950s and 60s. But even that's a two-sided coin, because there's two types of diversity. There's demographic diversity and there's moral diversity. Now, demographic diversity has been great for the profession because it helps us better serve the increasing demographic diversity of our population. The other good thing about it is that it has more than doubled the potential applicants to dental school. But moral diversity is a dire threat to the profession's credibility. Because when dentists don't share moral values, there's no consensus regarding what behaviors are appropriate and what behaviors are inappropriate. Studies show that many dentists believe that as long as they are practicing within the law, ethics really don't matter. For them, dentistry is just a means to a good income. And of course, their behaviors and their marketing techniques show it. Unfortunately, the public is beginning to recognize the symptoms. Surveys are showing that dentistry is losing the public's trust. So even though we're still in the top tier of trusted professions, we are losing ground, and we are particularly losing grounds with other healthcare professions. We are currently below nurses, pharmacists, and physicians in terms of public trust. And it hasn't always been that way. Now, this isn't Sunday, so I don't want you to think that I'm highlighting these problems to, just pontificate. The reason I'm highlighting these problems to you is to increase the awareness that they exist. Because most dentists today are hardworking, conscientious men and women who are trying their best to do what's for their patients, do what's best for their patients. But the trouble is, there's a steady increase in the number of outliers, and it's become the new normal. Many younger dentists just don't recognize that this really can have long-term consequences. To them, it's just background clutter in their busy lives, and they don't believe it's a problem. According to social psychologists, shared values are the glue that hold organizations, cultures, and subcultures together. Conversely, without shared values, organizations, cultures, and subcultures unravel. So both the increased ethical misconduct by dentists and the ADA's declining market share is understandable and predictable in today's culture. That brings us to the role of the American College of Dentists today. I certainly believe, and I hope you do, that the American College must pursue its core mission with renewed resolve. Likewise, Americans dentists must renew their commitment to the profession's ethics. Now for the really big question. If we seriously want to preserve the credibility of dentistry, is it even possible today to have the impact like those dentists did in the first half of the 20th century? For reasons that I've already discussed, it's unlikely that we'll get much help from dental boards and lawmakers. Furthermore, the Federal Trade Commission, our litigious society, and our moral diversity will make it considerably more difficult. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. After all, it's nice to have all these outside people taking care of our problems, but This problem is actually an intrinsic problem. The unraveling of today's profession is coming from within, so we need to fix it from within. So, how can we make that happen? Well, today's ability to communicate is unparalleled in history. So, with the proper use of our communication skills and the available communications technology, we can employ the most effective tool for behavior modification: peer pressure. According to social scientists, peer pressure is and always has been the greatest determinant of human behavior. It's much more effective than laws and regulations and that sort of thing. That's why if you have teenage kids, the most important thing you can know is what their friends are like. Because your teenage kids' behavior and perhaps even their future is largely dependent upon the behavioral standards of their friends. Now, if you doubt the behavioral impact of peer pressure, let's consider the power of today's political correctness. Because political correctness is basically just peer pressure that's designed to silence and shame those who disagree with the worldview of its proponents. And regardless of what your personal worldview may be, it's pretty hard to deny its effectiveness. And we have all witnessed the public excoriation of those who fail to comply. As dentists, you are well-educated professionals with a high capacity for independent thought and critical thinking. Nonetheless, I suspect that few of you dare challenge political correctness except when you're maybe among your more trusted friends. We are social animals, and there's a bunch of psychologists who are actually trying to elevate this and call humans ultra-social animals. The fact is, peer pressure works. So if we are serious about preserving the integrity of the profession, we can aggressively use peer pressure to make sure that America's dentists indelibly understand that unethical behavior is unacceptable to their peers. They need to know that ethical misconduct, one, denigrates the credibility of the profession. Two, it betrays the trust of our patients. And three, that it's not politically correct. Now, for such an audacious effort to be effective, not everyone needs to take a leadership role, but broad professional support for those who do is essential. Dave Chambers, who is the editor for the American College of Dentists, says that morality is people working together for a better world. Obviously, those dentists in the 1950s and 1960s did give broad support to improving the morality and ethics of the dental profession. And I absolutely know for a fact that that's still a very high priority for many dentists. But quite frankly, I don't know if the support in the profession today is broad enough for such an effort to be effective. But if dentists don't even know that we have challenges, they can't possibly understand the need to address them. So we need to educate American dentists about our challenges. Now, as you would probably guess, the American College recognizes the magnitude of the problem. And so they've just completed a very comprehensive, and I might say expensive, study on the ethics in dentistry. Just as the Guy's report was used for dental education reform, this information could be used for dental ethics reform. I was on the Board of Regents for the American College when this project was commissioned, but I'm no longer on it, so I have not seen the final result. But it should be available very soon. Okay, to summarize the reality of dentistry status today. This is a great time to be a dentist. But beneath the surface, the profession is facing challenges that are very similar to those challenges in 1920. Our long-term credibility and professional status is in jeopardy. We are the beneficiaries of the incredible public trust that we inherited from those dentists who preceded us. And likewise, we are responsible for the public trust that will be inherited by those who follow us. So if we want to take action, we can use recent ethics studies by the 8 American colleges that I just mentioned to help define these ethical challenges that we face. And as I've also said, peer pressure is probably the best tool we can use to accomplish our mission. If we choose to ignore these challenges, we will be abdicating our responsibility to the profession, and of course, we will be squandering the historic achievements of those who preceded us. But if enough of us work together for a shared goal, we can safeguard the profession's credibility for the future. It was done by those concerned dentists in the first half of the 20th century, and if we work together, it can be done again in the first half of the 21st century. Thank you.